this morning for having me here in UCC. I'm really grateful to be able to be among people who want to change some law and enforce other law and make things overall better, because quite often things are just being talked about. But quite often coming out of Cork, I come back and I think on my way back, you know what, I can do something. And it is an inspiration being here, because you're full of energy to actually change something. This morning I want to just briefly, assuming I can work this system, da-da, da-da. How do I get to the next slide? Da-da. No, got it. It's just this click. Sorry, I did it on that. Or F5. Okay. But I want to get back to here. So I want to talk to you about law enforcement, difficulties with law enforcement this morning. I'm going to do that on the hand of a few case studies, and I have a few props with me as well. Marine-related decision-making is slightly different to that on land, because quite often the marine environment belongs to all of us. We all feel that we have rights and uses, but we don't necessarily know who has responsibilities and what our responsibilities are. I'm going to look at some challenges, good practices, case studies, and recommendations. The coastal zone is our last commons, and I think quite often we forget that. There is a danger that within 2 years, if we don't change our Fisheries Act's extra section, Section 19A, for example, thousands of hectares of land could become privatized with squatters' rights, as those who have aquaculture licenses and whose licenses have run out are still continuing to use that ground. Therefore, we shouldn't just take these commons for granted, but really look at them. It's our duty to look after them for our children and children's children. It's our privilege. We must use them wisely. I have some case studies now which go around the country, from Tramore in County Waterford to Tinnaburna in County Wexford, looked at some transboundary cases in Lough Foyle, and then looking at aquaculture around the whole country and Harvest 2020. Some of this goes with what we call in Coastwatch the law model dance, and we take one in particular, the bird case aquaculture. And I have some props with me just to show you how fast or slow things move. And you might take one of these. I can ask one of you to take them and pass them around. That little lad on that postcard is my little boy, who is now in his mid-30s. The photo on the right is a photo of Tramore landfill site. And when my little lad was small and I came across the landfill site, I decided that it would really have to change. At the time, everything from hospital waste to commercial waste to normal consumer waste was going into Tramore landfill site. Tramore landfill site, I didn't have a map for you here, apologies, was strategically built like 27 other landfill sites in the country into the marine environment, covering salt marsh and foreshore, including seagrass beds. We had a complaint to the Commission, seeing that nationally, unfortunately, we weren't being heard. That complaint had a 13.5 months, 13 years and 5 months gestation period until it hit the European Court, and the judgment was the famous waste case. In that time, nobody stopped doing anything. The landfill kept on being filled, and nature kept on suffering. As a result of the case, however, we saw for the first time as a serious, significant change in government attitude and what happened next. particularly one civil servant, Pat Fenton in the Department of the Environment, took the lead in saying, let's try and change it and have a new approach. You, the complainant, what do you now want? The court said, you either take everything out or you compensate. For the first time ever, we had joint meetings with local authorities, local citizens, and environmental NGO saying, okay, it is probably going to do more damage taking everything out and putting it elsewhere than now looking at closing this, good capping and monitoring, and having a compensatory area. Where would we have a compensatory area? Here again, we were asked what was our view on that. We consulted locally and then came up with a site in the same Tremor-Back Marsh, which was an SAC, or still is, SPA-SAC Ramsar site, but an area diked off for land for agriculture. We talked to the farmers, and one farmer, James O'Sullivan, agreed that this would be a good idea. Not only did he agree, but his dad dug out a video on how, when the dike was once breached, the sea came in and what the sea then did. So there was local knowledge, local information which could immediately go in to creating Ireland's first managed retreat. That first managed retreat was actually opened 3 days ago. Did any of you hear about it? No. Was RTE there? No. Was anything done about it? No. Unfortunately not. So we're not perfect yet, because there was a huge potential to really do something about telling people that, in this case, things are really changing. Now, they don't look that brilliant yet, but I want to just show you this bottom photo there of the seagrass. Seagrass is very valuable. It's like eating caviar. Well, no, something which you can eat lots of times, all the time. That had been damaged and wiped out locally around the landfill site. In the last 2.5 years, the seagrass has started recolonizing the area around the landfill, showing that, and very often that does not happen, that the conditions were exactly right, and that you now do not have, at least at the surface, discharge damaging this. So you have genuine restoration around the landfill area, as well as this compensatory area. Now, I just want to say that while I teach in civil engineering, I am not an engineer. However, this is where things could be slightly tweaked, because this is an engineer's dream, because every line is straight, while nature prefers the meanders. However, so that is where the limits came to what we were able to influence. We were able to say where the site should be. We put in our own proposals on how it could be done. We believe that our proposals would have cost about 20% of what was actually cost in the end. However, the end result is we're having our first managed retreat with 7 hectares of agricultural land given back to the sea, and an extra 7 hectares beside that left to nature, which are these rectangulars, which we can tweak further. The second case I want to come to now is Tinnaburner, which isn't such a, well, there are bright sides to it, but overall it's awful. I talked about it once before. This is a dune system. It was in the scientific reports declared the finest grey dune system in all of Ireland for specific bryophytes and fungi. Very, very high value. That is what it looked like in an aerial view of 2000. That's what it looks like after designation in an aerial view of 2005. Why? Because there was a positive incentive for the farmer to break the law and put in up to 800 cattle where there should have been 18. Authorities knew about it, were alerted to it, did not act. The cost to the farmer has still had an overall benefit. There was no court case against him. We put in an EU complaint because there was no action nationally, and eventually, we still have a pilot there, eventually a restoration plan was agreed when the cattle were taken off. This is, on the positive side, the first restoration plan in the country which is actually published. Because up to now, restoration plans are deemed to be a private agreement between government and the polluter or damager. Under John Gormley, for the first time, that plan was published. And also, due to the first time having real transparency, the plan was drastically changed to to be enforceable. Because quite often, if you make a plan which is not enforceable, it's not going to be enforced. That plan was wisely written to be enforceable. However, it wasn't enforced. Because sadly, I'm missing a slide. Sadly, the agreed plan, which is published in official journals, was then changed. So some items, like all dung, must be removed from the site because grey dune needs a very low nutrient content. An adjustment was made that a lot of that dung could be buried on site. So with little adjustments going on along, the overall effect is that the farmer has still made a lot of money. He will not be, unless we can change that still, cost compliance for bad behavior will not be applied this year because he's behaving so well. Sadly, it's now 2013. That dune could be well on its way to restoration, but it's still being hampered by having a lot of dung sitting on it, as well as some other difficulties. We go to transboundary issues, and we go to mobile sewage. You know the way sewage nowadays, under the Urban Wastewater Directive, is supposed to come together in one place. It's supposed to be treated nicely, and then it goes out in a pipe into the sea. So in Morville, it was the same. 20 years ago, they thought it would be a good idea to treat it, particularly because there's a lot of bathing waters, native oyster beds, seagrass beds, all in that area. So sewage should be treated, and the more people you have, the more you should treat it. Sadly, there's still no sewage treatment, and I was going to waive a toilet roll, but I'm not. Just imagine it. It's still going in there. So Donegal County Council put together a proposal for a good treatment plant with what we consider a bad outfall, because the outfall is to go right through the seagrass bed, which is a very high-value habitat, right next to a native oyster bed, and so if there's an onshore wind, right into the best bathing beach. So we've been arguing quite strongly against this. However, Donegal County Council motored on the suspicion that they might not get a foreshore license. They came up with a new idea. The new idea was, let us compulsory purchase order the ground which the pipe would be on from government, because then we don't need a license, because if we own it, we don't need a license. So they went ahead with a compulsory purchase order, which we in Coastwatch felt was rather worrying, because other local authorities might get the same idea, and before you know where you are, you could have compulsory purchase order to half the coast around us. Because we weren't heard, we eventually went to the Northern Irish Heritage Service and asked them what they thought. Seeing that it's a transboundary issue, did they like that the sewage was going to go into Lough Foyle, which was a transboundary water? And the Northern Irish said they did not like it at all at all. So they started making inquiries, and what they liked even less was that the compulsory purchase order seabed, they thought, was theirs and wasn't Southern Irish government's prerogative to give to anybody. So now we have, within our country, in 2013, a situation where one government allows seabed to be compulsory purchased by a county council, while another government thinks that they own it. So we've got a little bit of a problem there. We've got other problems in the transboundary area. We've also got a quarry, and in symbol of that, I have got some nice things. This is in the River Foyle, and it has been going, liberally taking gravel and sand from both sides. On any given day, he says he's working on the other side. Donegal County Council has taken him to court, but that is 3 years ago. The court hasn't had the time to hear this case. Again, what is the story? Just as with Tinner Burner and as with sewage, damage to the environment continues while we are thinking about what to do about administration or legislation. While we have this lag in time, nature will keep on being lost. For anything, even if you have a law, even if a site is designated, like in Lough Swilly, seagrass protection will need more than just designation. It needs local support. For locals to support something, they actually need to be able to identify it so that they know what it is. They need to know that it's special. They need to be very proud of it, because pride and love for it, that will make you protect. So law enforcement, which is thought of as something which is a law which somebody enforces on its own, is never going to work. And we need public participation. It's absolutely essential, particularly in Ireland with over 7,000 kilometers of coast and not a single site manager for a single Natura 2000 site. If we don't have public participation and informed public participation, we're never going to win. So let's see what happened with the Marine Strategy Framework Directive. The law came in early, timely, or I can't remember which it was worded, public participation for the implementation of the Marine Strategy Framework Directive. And we were so excited. This is going to be the difference. We are going to have a system, even though Ireland doesn't have coastal zone management, here, through this law, as a catalyst, we're going to get it. Unfortunately, one senior person dealing with that directive told me last autumn, when we had missed our first deadline on reporting to Brussels what the status of our coastal zone was, that while he agreed that it was there in the law, and while he agreed that in theory and thinking philosophically it would be a good idea, I must understand that under these economic circumstances there was no time in Ireland for such niceties. The problem is that while people still think it's a nicety rather than an essential ingredient, again, we'll get nowhere. I'll skip this. This is just strategic environmental assessment. Yesterday, a few of us here were at a meeting with the Minister of Agriculture, Simon Coveney. And we were lamenting the lack of the strategic environmental assessment of Food Harvest 2020. Well, we weren't just lamenting, we were asking, with the new action which the government is now proposing of putting in an SEA, how were the findings of the SEA going to be included in Food Harvest 2020? And there were many answers given, so I don't want to say the incorrect thing. However, the thing which stuck out in my mind was, let us first see what the suggestions are arising out of the SEA before we commit whether we are going to integrate them or not. Now, this is my wording, it's not the exact wording, but that is the essence. That's a problem having a retrospect SEA. That, by the way, is our shop window in Trinity. So just a quick tour. Okay, very quick. A few good things, a few bad things. On the good thing, there's an EPA dredge and dump committee which I'm sitting on. In the beginning, I was so frustrated, I thought after every meeting, this is going to be my last meeting. And then a strategy started emerging. There was a proper logical overview. How do we address cases? What kind of strategic guidance can we have for the ports so that they know what is actually required? And a transparency on historic licenses. Where are they so that everyone can have access to them? So you can see definite improvements. You're looking at another thing, though, like the shellfish minimum size. The common whelk minimum catch size in Ireland was 50 millimeters in length. The whelk, you know the shell which you put behind your ear? I'm not going to waste 30 seconds to search for it. Irish law was based on Irish scientific knowledge and was wise, because that's minimum size for the female to have reproduced once. So it was a white law. EU law came in, which said that the minimum size, now a country could say it had to be larger, had to be at least 45 millimeters. Now, the law specifically said you can state your own size. However, without public consultation, but after industry consultation, the size would change to 45. And our whelk population, which was reasonably stable and afforded a reasonable number of fishermen and income, slumped within 2 years. Our last case, which I'll just briefly manage, is law enforcement on mussel seed dredging. Mussel seed dredging mussel seed is needed for aquaculture. Mussel culture and seed taking is controlled in SPAs, SACs by the Waddenzee judgment, which everybody knows as a classic case. Exactly that method used in the Waddenzee and then stopped is employed by more or less the same Dutch people who have come from the Waddenzee to Ireland. We also had some mussel culture, but it has multiplied tenfold in the last 10 years. It is, on our opinion, totally, and on the opinion of the local mussel fishermen who used to get their seed very close by, totally unsustainable of what is happening now. What is happening now is that mussel seed is identified, and whether the site is designated or not, the seed is taken. And in this case, Longband of Wexford was totally dredged by many boats last October, with the Navy not finding a boat to stop them. So the trends are that some things are getting better, and there is some better EU law enforcement, but overall, our nature, our Article 17 assessments are not improving overall, and there are many trends which are actually going down, and therefore we have to change, we have to have more public participation, we have to have far more incentives for people to do the right thing. Thank you very much. I want to go on to the final thing.